Hello everybody, I'm here today with Jesai Jayhmes. I've been attending his Beelzebub theatres on Sunday nights, a wonderful group that he runs where we read Beelzebub's tales in a kind of an acting way, but I'm going to let Jesai explain to us what Beelzebub's theatre is all about. Thank you for joining us, Jesai.
Thank you, Debbie. It's a delight and an honor to be with you. I've been enjoying your other interviews.
Oh, thank you.
And derived much nourishment from them. Beelzebub's theater. Well, for any of the listeners out there who are familiar with Beelzebub's tales, 1,260 some pages, it's an absurd task to even start to visualize it as a theater piece. In order to enter into this conversation, I'd have to explain a little bit about my own background in theater. I am a classically trained actor and have spent a number of years in experimental research, Grotowski-ish based. A lot of my inspiration comes from the work of Peter Brook, although I've never had the opportunity to work directly with him. I've seen many of his productions live, from the times that I was a young drama student up until quite recently.
And he was the guy that made Meetings with Remarkable Men into a movie, Peter Brooks.
Correct.
Just so that people know there's a Gurdjieff connection there.
Yes, and it wasn't until I saw that he had made this book into a movie that I realized, oh, of course, he's in the Gurdjieff work. Why did that not come to me before? What many people who only know his work through that movie don't know is that he is one of the preeminent theater directors in the world. Many of his productions have been tremendous breakthroughs and given permission to a whole generation of theater explorers to push the boundaries of the art form. There's a writer, critic, director named Richard Schechner that talked about, in one of his books, Between Theater and Anthropology. He divided theater experiences into two areas: theater that transports and theater that transforms. And he used the word theater very loosely to describe any kind of gathering that was, in a sense, premeditated. So, for instance, a theater performance is rehearsed, it's planned, there's a group of people who are putting it together, there's an opening night, and there's an invitation of guests to enter and partake in the experience. That's only one of many kinds of social gatherings, which include Papua New Guinea initiations, weddings, funerals, classroom teachings, conferences, retreats, seminars, where there's a facilitator, a teacher, a lecturer, a leader, a performer, a storyteller, a group of people, a choir. So the point is, the definition of what can be termed theater is very broad. So getting back to those two aspects, theater that transforms and theater that transports. He describes theater that transforms as, well, these are my words: forget your troubles, come on, get happy, toss all your fears away. You come in, you carry all your baggage that you're going through, and you go, just let me forget all of this for a little while. And you go see the play, and it's wonderful, delightful, you're carried away on somebody else's dream, and you're transported back to pretty much the same place you were afterwards.
So escapism.
That's one way of looking at it, yeah. Transported, he calls it. And then if it's Broadway, you go out to dinner and you say, oh, wasn't that marvelous? Oh, yes, it was. What shall we see tomorrow night? Or as a young actor in London, when I went to drama school, I used to work in a ticket agency on Shaftesbury Avenue. And people would inevitably come in to buy tickets to a show by looking around the walls and seeing all the posters of the shows, and it would say, "Oh, Mousetrap, now in its 30th year, we've got to go see that, honey." So they would choose by the amount of time it's been running, as if that was a declaration to how good it was. So then there are other events and experiences where not only the audience, but the performers themselves are transformed. And that means that through the event itself, it may happen that the community is reorganized in a new way, that the power structures that happen in the community are no longer the same, that the child becomes a man, that couples are united, that families are joined, that someone goes through a rites of passage where they know in relation to the community that they can no longer be who they were. Their role has changed. And in many cases, rituals, events, and experiences have been organized throughout history to accomplish these things. When I was introduced to the work of researchers and explorers like Grotowski, my understanding is that he was exploring ways to mine the depths of these kinds of experiences, where the actors themselves are transformed simply through the enacting the ritual of whatever it is. And at the time, I was in drama school in a classical theater school in England called Webber Douglas Academy of Dramatic Art. And I was learning that that I had a passion for theater as an art form. And I was hoping that theater school was going to be a place where I could explore that more as a theater artist. Well, what I discovered, which is true of not only that school, but most of the legitimate drama training academies in England and the world, is that we were being trained to get a job in the profession as it exists. So we learned that each one of us were a type, and that type was marketable. And if we understood our type and marketed it well, we could have a career in the theater. There were behaviors that were accepted. There were forms of etiquette that needed to be followed. There were, later on, we discovered there were people that you had to be nice to. There were people who might want favors in one way or another to allow you to get where you wanted to go. And we've heard about those. And I'm not going to go into those things right now. However, what was presented to me was a paradox. I understood theater as a group collaborative form, where there might be one director who was guiding the vision so that the audience really did receive something powerful. But the way of teaching and the formulation of the business was very much a solo act. I need to forward my career. I need to get seen by such and such director and such agent. I need to get a better part each time. I need to make sure I'm seen and I stand out. Also, the finances connected to the profession were that it's very difficult to afford to rehearse for long periods of time. Say 3 to 4 weeks is often large. So one gets together with a group, with a community, with a collective of strangers for 3 to 4 weeks and makes a family. although not a lot of the work is built on the qualities and functionality of group dynamics. It's more based on getting the show up, getting an opening night, being seen, get good reviews. Hopefully the audience comes, we get bums on seats, we can pay our bills, the funders like it, and anyway, the whole scene. That started to irk me more and more. Because as a child, I liked turning my garage into theater and doing it for fun. Like home for me is having rehearsals in the house. And so I kept looking for that same kind of feeling. And then when I read Grotowski's work, and I read this one line, that the idea that there was something called the holy actor. And having been raised, the holy actor, that the quest of the actor was or is a spiritual, transformative, evolving process. I just got goosebumps when I first understood that there were people using that kind of language in an art form that I had a great passion for. So I've continued in various ways to investigate that throughout my life, including working with groups of people, one time for 3 years with the same group of people in Holland, with a director, leader, who with whom it was quite a learning experience to endure that. It was a form of a boot camp. We did amazing, powerful work that toured throughout Europe, went to Australia, performed in New York at La Mama. The name of the group was called International Theater Research Group, KISS. I'm still in touch with some of the former members from that group. That was 30 years ago. I had been reading several years previously the work of Mr. Gurdjieff. I was introduced to it by a friend of mine who needed to give me some help in the middle of my own emotional breakdown. And it certainly helped. A friend of mine and I got the books, read them for 3 months, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson and In Search of the Miraculous. And that led to a series of unusual coincidences, of course, one of which was within 2 weeks of finishing the books, we were hitchhiking to Daglingworth in England to participate in a workshop, a work weekend offered by Anthony Blake.
Good old Anthony.
Hello, Anthony. That was 40 years ago.
Wow.
And that was prior to my going off to Holland to join this theater company. A few months prior, actually. And it wasn't until 40 years later in Oregon, in Portland, at the A&E conference, my first one that I attended, that somebody said to me, "Oh, Anthony Blake is here." And I went, "Anthony Blake, my first teacher in this." And we reconnected. I had read an essay of his several years earlier on acting, which I found resonated with everything that I felt from the Grotowski work and Peter Brook, and his level of articulation of what the role of acting was, I found was splendid. So it was a thrill for me to reconnect.
What was that essay called? Do you remember?
You know, Josh put a link to it on the Beelzebub site. I don't have it in my mind at this moment, but it's available. It's out there. We'll find it again, and Tony will no doubt say it. So when we reconnected, and I told him this story, and we started to share about theater, which is a passion for him. So he very kindly invited me to participate in a number of events in Torrenteras in Spain, and in Claymont and in Nashville. We little by little reintroduced for him, because he had done many experiments over the years of bringing Beelzebub to life in theater. And I had done a recording of Beelzebub, as have you. And the learning of reading that aloud for me, coming from theater, was like a first reading of a text that I was inspired to bring to life on the stage. So that's my little monologue of bringing us up to date, more or less. There are a lot of details in the middle of that, but
Because it
there we
does
have
feel
it.
like it needs to be performed, doesn't it, Beelzebub's Tales in some ways? But this is why I like doing the group with you on Sunday nights, because when we're reading it, we're trying to perform it. Okay, it's all through the audio, we're saying it, but you encourage us to really act it out, which really makes a brilliant way of actually understanding what the Tales is about, or bringing a new way of looking at it that maybe I hadn't looked at before.
I'm glad you're mentioning that. When I first read the book, I was stunned, delighted, and happy that the author gave directions for how to read his work. And the second reading is, I don't know the words exactly, I don't have the book in front of me, but
to somebody else, isn't it?
Read aloud as if to someone else. There are different ways to interpret that, but for me, I interpret it as read aloud, imagining you're speaking to somebody else. And that's the first thing that an actor does with text, any text, to try to fathom the gist of why the person and who the person is speaking to. So when we read Beelzebub's Tales, it's very clear that the whole book is storytelling. Every person who speaks is telling a story or explaining something to somebody else. It's not a reading. The narrator at the very beginning sets the scene for us and tells us what year it is, what's happening, how to listen to this, where the scene is, picture this, picture that. Beelzebub, and at his feet is Hussein. He describes how Hussein looks up to his grandfather, the qualities of the listening of Hussein, the quality of attention. And Beelzebub is described as with the warmth and delight that he has of spending this time with his grandson. For me, he's teaching us how to teach and how to learn, how to receive information, how to ask powerful questions. And it's not directly in the content that he's doing that. It's in the structure of how he's telling the story. And those things can be best communicated by embodying that. I take on being Beelzebub. And I'm not just reading aloud, I'm speaking the words to someone that I care deeply about, and I care deeply that he understands and receives everything and can assimilate it for his education. It's his initiation. And by the end of the book, we learn, because Beelzebub says so, by the final question that Hussein asks Beelzebub, Beelzebub is satisfied that he has acquired and absorbed the learning in a way that he's made it his own, and now he can move forward in his life with it. It's a profound teaching tool when it's communicated orally.
Well, one of the things you were saying about earlier was about when you first started out in acting, they want to put you into a type, don't they? I mean, that happens to many actors, and actors want to break that type or break that mold even. And I feel sometimes when reading the Beelzebub's Tales aloud, you suddenly see these actors are, I mean, the characters in the book are in molds, and he's trying to teach people to break that mold. You know, is that what you would agree with, or what do you think? He's teaching us to, or suggesting to us how to break free of being a type.
Okay. In many of the stories, different characters are introduced, and they are described, and they're described on 3 levels, given it's Gurdjieff. It's often described how they walk, how they carry themselves, how they sit, how they stand, the quality of their voice, what their intention is, what their emotional state is. All of these characters, yes, are typicalities. They're how their personality is expressed in the form that they are in. In the business of theater, and it's more in movies than in theater, we are hired as types because they don't think the audience will buy someone different than that type. It's like Robert De Niro wanted to do comedy for a long time, and he's always known as the bad guy, tough guy. So who's going to buy him doing comedy? But he was able to make that shift after a while. People who play superheroes, it's hard for them to play sensitive and vulnerable people. But there are exceptions to that as well. Actors who know that within us are all different types. And the art of acting allows us to observe ourselves by inhabiting the shoes of others, by knowing actually what it takes to enter the posture and the series of emotions that might pass through me, or the thoughts that might come up as a result of wanting a certain thing. Like I'm working on King Lear at the moment, and he knows he's going to die. He has no male heirs. He only has 3 daughters. They don't like each other. He would like there to be no war after he dies, and he'd like to die a peaceful death. At least that's my take on it. So placing myself in the condition of the inevitability of my own death, which is a practice that many esoteric parts of religions ask, and certainly Gurdjieff talks about it a lot, allows for certain awarenesses to come up. And then when the job is to communicate that to somebody else, that's where I get to give that away and share it and make it my own. It's a little bit like one of the best ways to learn something is to try to teach it. Find out how much you know by having to try to teach somebody else that too, and you also find the holes in your own knowledge. So I think the question that you posed just then about types and Beelzebub and what Gurdjieff was after, this is a kind of rambling way of landing on all those things. We're all a type because of our upbringing. And the methodologies in acting allow us the opportunity to see ourselves, to actually see our type and inhabit the types of others, like to step through that. And some actors, when they're developing, have a harder time of that than others. Some feed on their own personality and are performer entertainers. And some put on characteristics of different people because they want to pretend it's not them. And that's also not it. There's a something in the middle that's more essence-based, that sometimes needs different conditions for work, other than getting a casting call and I playing a type and being in a play for 3 weeks and putting it up and trying to get critics to come. It needs, for me, a more immersive, exploratory experience. What I'm interested in is where the work changes me. And by so doing, maybe can more deeply impact the people who have come to witness it. I sense that in the work of Beelzebub. And bringing it to the stage is not just speaking those words well. It's creating experiences for a public who enter that parallels or deepens the learning that's suggested in various chapters. That's where the exploration comes in. There's no movie that is word for word the book. There is no play that uses every single word of a novel to bring it to life. And many people do say, oh, the book was so much better. Well, the book is a different experience. The book is a reading. And the event is an experience, a communal experience.
Because that's one of the things I like about when we do Beelzebub's theatre together, which you've put on, was that because we're reading the book as if we're reading it to somebody else, but you're making us like actors. I'm not an actor myself, but it is a different way of bringing the book alive, I suppose is what I'm saying, because it does bring the book more alive if you kind of throw yourself in, as you say, of doing it from an actor's point of view. Was that why you wanted to start doing Beelzebub's theatre, to try and help people to understand the book more?
I wanted to do it because the practice of my own, of reading it and bringing it to life and really enjoying it and feeling the heart and the generosity and the cleverness and the wit of the writer and the characters that are presented. I wanted to share that with more people and hopefully empower others to explore learning it in that way. Reading aloud is very different than speaking from your heart to somebody that you care about. And that is the process that an actor goes through when working on any text that's not their own. And it's quite an involved process. A lot of people say, how did you learn all those lines? Well, that's only step one. Step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is to make it your own, think it up at the moment, imagine that you don't know what you're going to say next and say it and care about it and want to see the change in the other person when it's happening. All of those steps are part of what is explored in a theater troupe, for one thing, and how to communicate through physicality, through use of space, through use of colors, through use of music, through use of proximity to the audience or not, or whether the audience or some of them are actually brought into the action as performers and they're suddenly aware of themselves being seen. There's so many layers offered in theater where people can enter into an experience where, because they did not expect it, they have a chance to observe themselves in a new way at that moment. There's a tiny little awakening moment. Like, oh, I didn't expect this. I didn't know what I expected, but I never expected this. Oh, here I am. Oh, I'm saying these words. Oh, people are looking at me. Oh, I'm noticing that all that's happening. That has value that alone has value. And if those kinds of things can be repeated often enough, it's possible that a curiosity can be developed and a determination to have more of that. Find out what that is and where that leads.
I think we
So,
should just clarify that your Beelzebub's theatre isn't, you haven't got a production company of everyone coming to perform it. It's done on Zoom, isn't it? So anyone can join from worldwide. And you don't have to be an actor to partake in it. It's a fabulous way of learning how to read the book aloud as if to somebody else.
yes, yeah, at this moment, the Beelzebub Theater project that was put on Facebook, because it also began right at the beginning of coronavirus, so did other of my projects that all involved getting groups of people together. Several things began right at the beginning of coronavirus. So we had transferred to Zoom, as many people in the world are right now, to see what's possible in the initial exploration of this book. At some point, there will be live workshops at a theater property that last days, where the focus can be, let's take this one chapter and see what kind of experience can be created around it. Tony has reminded us frequently that from his perspective, Mr. Gurdjieff wrote this book for, among other reasons, to inspire actors, to inspire artists, to work with the ideas in it in whatever way, shape, or form they feel compelled to, given that the intention and attention and heart and presence is brought to it. So there's a lot of material there that can last for at least 7 years of exploration with a dedicated group of people.
I agree with that. It definitely is presented in a way that you could do it in many ways. You know, there's been talk about trying to make it into a graphic novel. You know, like we were saying earlier, many of us have done audio versions. At the moment, I don't have the budget to make a film version.
Well, you do it with puppets.
Yeah, I do a few bits with puppets. It's very basic and very amateurish, but it's fun and I enjoy it. And it helps me to, the bit that I would do a section on makes me look at that section even more. So it's just diving in and trying to take a piece apart. It's a big book to try and get through.
It is. I think that's the point too. You're working with puppets and the benefit is to you. You gain a deeper understanding of the relationships involved and the way the story is told. I'm doing it at the moment by reading it aloud and dissecting the text to see why a certain word was chosen and what that can mean differently when it's said to somebody, what it implies in the relationship between them. And for some people, that's incredibly tedious work, but for actors accustomed to working with challenging texts, and Shakespeare is one of those, that's the kind of work that needs to be done. So that when people hear it only once, they go, oh, I get that. Or it makes sense to me. Let me think about that more. Rather than, I have no idea what the guy's talking about, and this bores the hell out of me, and I'm not going to touch it. So.
Well, people do come at it from different angles. I know people that look at it from the colour spectrum of looking at all the time, because he uses lots of colour in it, so it's very arty. You know, it's another way of looking at it. So those that get drawn to it find their way in. But as an actor, I'm going to bring up the chapter art where he does go on a bit about actors. But obviously, I you know, after what you were saying at the beginning of, was it the holy actor training that you said that you was aiming towards, that the
Grotowski, as far as I know, in modern times, first articulated as a process.
I wonder what Gurdjieff would think of that, because I think that's what he would call a real type of actor, wouldn't he? If you're bringing in the whole ways of doing it and using it as a sacred way of well, just becoming or presenting to people characters. But obviously in the chapter art, he can be quite damning of actors.
Well, those are those two different fields again. There's the sacred work, and there's the art business. I want to be somebody. Short story. In my acting school, we had an acting teacher who was formidable. And she asked one of the students in the class in the first couple weeks, she said, "So, what are you doing here?" to a young lady. And the young lady said, "I want to be an actress." And she looked at her and she said, "Actress is what prostitutes put on their passport. I am an actor." And she was making a distinction between the art and the way the public views it. You know, of course, for many years, there were no actresses. Shakespeare had no actresses. All the parts were played by men. There are many traditions where that is true, and many stories how actress and dancer and courtesan and prostitute were all the same thing. So this century, post-industrial revolution, where women begin to get more rights in public, and there begins to be a little bit more language around respecting that everybody has value. She needed to differentiate that, and that was now 40 years ago, to say, no, we are artists, we are craftsmen, we are technicians, we are not prostitutes. Now, was she going as far as the sacred holy actor? No, not really, because the requirements of the profession are still more, you need to be castable. And if you're not castable, you don't get a role. If you don't get a role, you don't get work. And if you don't get work, you don't get seen. And if you don't get seen, you don't get famous, or you don't get a better job. And it's a rat race there, and it's quite competitive. The other side is the holy actor research art form. Do you make a living at that? In fact, if you even try to think of it as making a living, you will miss the point. You won't get there from here. So there's a large paradox and a big gulf between the two fields. One might say it's the difference between personality and essence. Perhaps it is. And I don't know whether there's a way to bring those two together. So for 10 years ago, I was sitting in the 12th floor of a one-bedroom apartment in Vancouver, Canada. I had an agent. I was going to auditions. I was in a local theater group that was experimental and did good work in the community, helping people tell their stories and bring their stories to life. And at the same time, I was going out for auditions, and I thought, hey, I'm a good-looking guy. I can play leads. Well, it turns out I'm thin and bony in their terms. So the only parts that I'll get sent for is psycho killers and twisted, weird people. And in Vancouver, it was all science fiction. A lot of science fiction shows shot there. So a lot of weird, twisted people. And I had a few of those roles. And anyway, I reached the limit. One day I was sitting in my apartment, and I heard this sound in my head. It went, and I went to the internet, and I started downloading images of land, amphitheaters, regenerative agriculture, meeting waterfalls, paths through woods, and events happening. Might have been a bit more than 10 years ago, and I'm going, where is this place? Who are these people? Where is this? So I kept asking that question. And within 2 months, I left the city. I moved to land up on the Sunshine Coast, where there happened to be a beautiful amphitheater that I heard about. A group of us negotiated to eventually purchase the land, which didn't happen. It might have been the right spot, but not the right people. It's like, where's the place, where's the people, and what's the work I'm supposed to be doing there? And literally for 10 years, I've been living on land retreat centers that either have amphitheaters or I had the possibility of helping to build one. In one place, I designed one that didn't get built. One place had retreats. One place couldn't have people come to it because it wasn't permitted. Another one was giving big conferences, but they were doing something else other than what I imagined. And last year I was shown the place. And right now it's on the verge of opening at a time when nobody can come.
Like,
yet.
the laws are against you, but at the same time they're offering you all this. They know they want you to do this acting out live in the amphitheaters and to bring people out into the open to see proper plays, but at the other time they're saying, we're just going to make sure everybody stays indoors for a moment while there's a play going on.
It's very interesting that it has a chance to happen in isolation, because it's giving me an opportunity to cultivate it literally in the way that I believe it was intended. It's the first place that doesn't have an agenda already stamped on it from other people's ownership or use. So yes, there is it'll be 200 to 300 seat capacity on land that within the size of a football field or so, even has bathrooms, it has a kitchen, it has a rancho, it has places for rehearsal, it has a yoga deck, and it will be able to accommodate groups and individuals and rehearsal processes for various projects that have been lining up over the years. And actually, I thank God that it's a bit of a lockdown, because it's being created without interruption. And when it does open, it will be able to open with clarity, focus, and intention around what it has been designed for. And people can say, oh, you manifested that. And I said, well, yeah, 10 years of looking.
But when it does open, you'll be promoting it, obviously, but is there a website or anything people can go to look it up, or how will you promote it for people to find out?
At the moment, there is a embryo Facebook page, but when it's launched, I'll send the message to you, and we'll put it out through our sources.
Yeah, we'll find the right people to pass it on, because your Beelzebub's Theatre's also through Facebook at the moment. So if people are interested in that, they'd have to go to the Facebook page.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed that about 30 people joined the Facebook page, but not that many people want to show up and be seen to read publicly. And it's not even publicly, it's a small group. But
it is quite difficult sometimes to go and to be put into that kind of environment. I was a bit nervous at first, and then I really enjoyed it in the end. Like I was saying earlier, it made me realise that reading Beelzebub aloud makes you look at the book differently. And it was quite a challenge, and we need challenges, but But it was sort of a fun challenge, not a, felt like you had the whip behind you.
Yeah. So in terms of theater, that's a theater workshop of understanding how to work with text, bring it alive, bring it into your voice, and speak it to someone else as if it's your words. That's actually what the exercise is. And it's step one of acting a text of anybody to somebody else. It's really different than reading. That's probably the third time I've said this. Reading aloud is not the same as taking someone else's words, making them your own, and saying them to somebody else that you care about. And
it doesn't matter how many times you say it, it's an important thing. Even that's why Gurdjieff said it. It's why it was his second recommendation of how to read the book. It's important.
Mm-hmm. And then third, only then fathom the gist of my writings. And somewhere after that for me was when I recorded it. And the special gift, one of the special gifts that I received, which he says that I intend for you with all my heart, whatever the words are, is that I started to view the whole creation of the book in a completely different way. And there were a few keys in it for me. One was the amount of time that he spent on theater and acting in the section on art, where yes, he not only speaks poorly about actors in the mainstream profession, but he also went into great detail describing what the sacred day, I think it was Saturday, that was the day of theater, that for him was the most interesting, and had lots of laughs, where people played different types and brought them together, and we learned truths about the incredibly bizarre behavior of human beings on the planet Earth. And theater can do that very quickly. And it really struck me was the whole story of Ashiata Shiyamash, which for me is a kind of centerpiece of the whole book. One, what Ashiata Shiyamash went through himself to be completely clean in his meditations, to come up with what can be done, and then the description of how he went about it. And the steps that he went about getting people to the point where they were able to persuade others that inside each of us there's something called consciousness, but it's really our subconsciousness, to train others to skillfully do that for 100 others, such that 100 others are skillful enough to do that for 100 others. And it was for me an awakening call of what actually education and training and a legomenism is. That from one generation to another, truths can be passed on in such a way that another generation gets it and takes it further, takes it deeper, and is empowered by it. In my experience of immersive theater training, one was spending 2.5 years creating an immersive experience based on the Divine Comedy that lasted 24 hours. The show was 24 hours. What we went through in creating that was what the process was. What one goes through in exploring, wrestling with, bringing to life the work of Beelzebub is, I believe, the process that Ashiata Shiyamash created to help people persuade others.
Okay, yes, I understand. That's really, yeah.
I believe that the book is a handbook. It's a deliberate, conscious, step-by-step methodology in persuading others of the truth that in us there's something called conscience, divine sacred conscience, that's in our subconsciousness that needs to be brought out as the primary form of consciousness. That's what the book does. And that's what reading it aloud helps make clear. And that's what the awareness that everybody in the book speaks aloud to someone else, to cause them to either change their ideas or intuit reality more deeply, or to laugh lunatically at the state of humans, and at the same time recognize that I am one of those. I am an example of that lunacy. To open up the possibilities of compassion, of what's the word, divine outrage when it's necessary. All of the range of emotions available to us, to observe ourselves in relation to the delivery of this material. It's a wonderful tool, and it was designed deliberately and consciously that way. So to read it and think about it only, and debate the ideas in it, misses the food that's in it. I'm sorry, I got to put it that way. It's like reading the Bible and debating whether the Word of God is the true word, and knowing from study that it's been retranslated a number of times, and that the word on the page is not the experience, the inner experience of awareness, and not
Well,
the same thing.
Because that's what you was just saying about people, say for example with the Bible, trying to decide whether the word is God or not. That's just intellectual, isn't it? Where reading it properly, we need to put all our senses in, emotional, physical, and intellect, which is hard to do.
It's hard to do, but thank God there's a methodology called theater and acting, which actually has all of that. All of that. I was recently asked to go to a transformational festival. You know, there's a whole run of transformational festivals out there in the world now. Some are like, Burning Man is supposed to be that. That's what, 100,000 people now, 80,000. There's Envision in Costa Rica that has 7,000. I prefer, and this one was, one that was about 120 people. And in 3 days, you can kind of feel like you got to know and connect with most of the people there. And I was asked to give a workshop on, it was called Sacred Theater and Storytelling. And I was watching all the other facilitators the days leading up to my piece, and many of them were working physically with the people, whether it was yoga or breath work or dance movement, 5 rhythms, dance stuff. And I was looking at it from different eyes because me doing my work in the 60s and 70s, and the majority of the people here at this event not born yet then, all the work they were doing and sharing with other people are what we did in experimental, exploratory, sacred theater. And they were using it now to feel good with each other, kind of connect, kind of break down physical boundaries, be more authentic with each other. And all of those things are true. They really do happen that way. And I explained to them that all of the work you're doing stops short. Do you know you're being trained as a really effective theater troupe? But that's not what they're using it for. In 3 days, they all go back to where they came from, and they send loving messages to each other on Facebook and WhatsApp. But the next step is, hey, how about an agreement to form a theater troupe? In a way, that happened with the Living Theater in the 60s. That was a community of varying numbers of people who traveled like a commune throughout Europe and popped up and did actions, events, spontaneous events in different places that caused, in theory, people to awaken to their situation in different ways. And other different kinds of theater groups have taken those strategies to explore creating creation stories, breaking the fourth wall in theater, putting on theater where theater is not, in subway tunnels and factories and farms, and re-examining what the theater experience is. All that work has been done in since the 60s, and much inspired through the work of Grotowski and others, some of whom are still alive doing their work. Bringing something essential to the party, and maybe helping us understand that inside our personality there is something called conscience that's in our subconsciousness that needs to be the guiding force of our life. And how do we get there from here? Maybe we're a little further on than we were when Gurdjieff was writing. Certainly he inspired a lot of people who had children, who brought up their children in alternative lifestyles, who have questioned and broken down a lot of barriers. So there is actually a movement going on that's now becoming public. And whether it stays in its essential components, or whether it's co-opted by mainstream culture, is yet to be seen. But we have COVID virus that's caused us all to pause. It's like a stop exercise for Gurdjieff. It's just stop, stop. What do you mean stop? I don't know how to stop.
That's very true. It is like a stop exercise, because he used to say, I felt he was warning us that something was coming to an end. He didn't sit there saying there's a plague coming to put you all inside, but he was preparing us for something. And I think he was aware that the cycle is coming to an end.
Yes. And this may be the beginning of the breakdown. It's not the breakdown. It's what follows from this.
Yes, and hopefully it'd be exactly what you've just been saying, of people suddenly, whether it's through theatre, art, or whatever, reading, people become aware of their conscience, which will come up and hopefully lead people forward into a better new world, and not one led by, I want to say, conglomerates or people that think from a materialistic point of view only.
Other energies.
Yes.
Yes, the paradox of the two different energies are certainly becoming more and more clear. One of control, mass control, and one of spiritual awakening. And Joseph Campbell said something like, light and dark exists. What can we do? Lean toward the light.
Yes.
Lean toward the light. Tony posted recently a short paper of John Bennett's about the next 50 years.
Yes.
Terminating now, 2020. In the next 50 years, we hit the stop button.
That's it. It was in the Gotham Mart paper. That was a very powerful paper. I do advise people to go and read that if they can, because he knew what was coming. Maybe not necessarily again that a plague was coming, but he was saying how things are going to be totally different by the time of 2020.
For
He gave
sure.
this talk in 1970.
Yep. I was the year before I graduated high school. And I was in London, and I didn't know that all this stuff was going on not far from me.
But you got called towards it in the end. Instead, you had to do your other work, your acting work, to develop into the actor that you are, but also the holy sacred actor, if I said it the right way around, sacred holy actor, rather than, turning into one of these manipulated genre type. Jesai Jayhmes plays the whatever you would play, the dashing hero or whatever, in every show you ever do. Instead, you've become a developed actor that's looking at things from all sides.
Yeah. Well, recently I've had recourse, well, certainly looking at it from all sides and looking at the ways they come together. I got into theater because it was a passion of my father's. We had every musical ever written. And there was a time when he had the opportunity to become a professional producer of theater, which he finally did when I turned 18 and decided to become an actor. But I made a promise to him on his deathbed. He said to me, so at some point in my spiritual leaning past, I changed my name to this name that you know me as. And on his deathbed, he said, so why'd you change your name to that stupid name? What's the matter with our name? And I thought, deathbed is not a good place to have this conversation. And I found myself very quickly going, okay, Dad, I'll tell you what. When I perform on Broadway, it'll be in the name you gave me, Jeff Burnett. It's my honoring of the family legacy. And last year, it became important to me to take this promise seriously. And I ended up writing what became known as a play called Jeff Burnett on Broadway, which I launched last year. And now that Broadway is shut down, I'd like to do it in virtual reality with Times Square being my set and me performing in the middle of it.
Yes.
with no people there and using all the billboards as screens. But what it has become is my opportunity to speak to everything we've been talking about right now. What is the profession? What are the downsides of treating it as a business? What is this other theater that is collaborative, regenerative, and community building? What is it as a spiritual path? What is it as a process of awakening? So these are the elements that I've attempted to bring into this story. An analysis of fame. What is it to become famous? And then to have your fame removed because you transgress the bounds of what we allow you to talk about as someone famous. We can anathematize you and remove you from public in an instant because you're only on public because we own the airwaves. And yeah, so there's all of that too. That's what's in there. And it's still developing. There is a website called jeffburnettonbroadway.com. There are a couple of videos and some more information on it. And as it grows, little things will be posted online, and maybe it will become a virtual reality piece that you put on goggles. And there's this guy named Jeff Burnett standing in the middle of an empty Times Square performing the piece. I would like to make that happen.
Yeah, I'd like to see it. It'd be very good. It'd be very entertaining.
That's my compromise to my dad, because I don't want to really live in Broadway for 6 months and do a run. But it's either that or have a Broadway theater for 3 nights and shoot it as a Netflix special. And then I go, okay, done. I did my promise. Now Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, done as a 7-day spectacle on the hills of Glastonbury.
Oh, that would be amazing.
where all the people move from one tent or castle to another to go to each of the chapters, and they sleep and they eat together and they explore all of it together.
Yeah,
Or
there's many.
if it were on Broadway, each book would be in a different theater, and each theater would be 10 hours long. I did
They
see.
could do it with Hilary Mantel's books. They made her plays into 12-hour her books into 12-hour plays. We can do it with Beelzebub's Tales.
Well, anything can be done, and
Yeah.
people go. I went to Peter Brook's Mahabharata, 8 hours long, at the Brooklyn Academy of Music.
Oh, wow.
He did it on the sides of mountains too, but there he did it in a theater, and the floor was dirt. I love that he works on dirt. I saw Peter Brook's production of The Eek, which was a story of an African tribe that he did with his multicultural cast. That was done at the Roundhouse in London, and the floor was dirt. Why? Because it happens in Africa. It's dirt. So I'm very, very excited to have an amphitheater that has a dirt floor. That's the other thing I forgot to mention. This amphitheater, for some odd reason, never had its floor poured. It's dirt. And I think I'm going to keep it that way.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I think it gives it some kind of character.
Well, it gives it authenticity.
Yeah.
Theater is so much built on the illusory fantasy of one or another director or designer, and Gurdjieff talks about that, with a bunch of actors doing exactly what the director tells them to do. And that was a form prevalent at his time. That was prior to Grotowski's experiments. Dirt is authentic. You walk on dirt, you look at people, and you have to speak the truth. There's an authenticity required in that environment. There's no illusion. This is what it is. This rock is a rock. It's not a paper mache rock to look like a rock. This tree is a tree. It's really growing. It's not a fake tree. These people in front of you and these people in front of you are real people sharing what's happening with them.
My dog is real, who's about to bark. I'm just going to quickly let him in. Sorry about that. He wants to. He normally goes away when I do videos or do Zooms because he doesn't like me talking to other people. But I could hear him scratching. It's like I can hear him starting to growl. So
maybe that's a sign that we've talked enough.
I think we are going to have to go because he wants to go for a walk. But Jesai, this has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. It's been fantastic talking about acting and Beelzebub. And I do say to people, if you can, come and join Beelzebub's Theatre. You can find it on Facebook. And then Jeff was saying about. Go on. Sorry.
It is important to be specific about what to expect. It's the beginning, the first steps of something called Beelzebub Theater Project. And on Zoom, in 2 hours, at the moment, we are able to explore 2 or 3 or 4 pages in detail of bringing it alive and speaking it as if it's your own words to somebody else. And there is inherent secret value in that. What you receive is a personal intuition, understanding, sense of knowing, sense of smelling something, as Gurdjieff says, to be investigated further. And at the same time, we occasionally brainstorm, if this were done in theater, what kind of experience would need to be created to do that? In Claymont with Tony, we brought to life the particular stories in chapter 1 of Beelzebub by working in groups and bringing to life the story of the Carapet of Tiflis and the story of the death of his grandmother, and a couple of the other stories that are specific stories, when he lost his wisdom tooth. So in groups of 3 or 4, each group got to work together for an hour or so to stage it for the others. And not using word for word, but conveying the story, the energy, the emotion, the context, the celebration, the fear, the eating pepper pods, and what that actually is, to bring the emotional life into it. And it felt to me like everybody got a great deal out of the enacting of it and sharing it with others. Now that's another step that we're not doing online at this moment, but we may move that way if there's enough consistency of participation, kind of brainstorming of what if, when we are all together, we take this part and bring it to life. What would it look like? Does it need bamboo? Does it need drums? Does it need do we need to chant this section? How can we try that? Try stuff out. There's no known method of doing it. There's only the will to try, play, and experiment. That's why they call it play making. Debbie,
Oh, it's been fantastic.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking an interest in in hearing this, and I'm very grateful for you, and want to honor the work you're doing of allowing people to share voices in your ongoing webcasts.
Oh, thank you.
And,
Well, I'm really honoured that you came and spoke. You know, I've always enjoyed all of your work and your reading, so I'm just as much honoured.
Well, thank you.